Hey there, YouTubers. This is going to be kind of a quick sequel. I like the technique I used in the last video to save myself some time. I'll give you a preview. We're going to talk about Transcendentalism up to a point, up to the point of where I've left off my research for today. This is ongoing research. I delve into the Transcendentalists from time to time. Now, why do I do that? Well, because we'll talk about it. Margaret Fuller and so on. And then I'm studying the history. You can see at the bottom here the title. Cyberpunk Documentary Part 3. It's kind of going on in the background. I kind of go around doing chores and maybe have the video going on while I do some housework or something. And then I'm going to talk about adding the Cayley-Menger determinant to my inventory of volume from edges formulae for tetrahedron, right? We've got Piero della Francesca, we've got Gerald de Jong, and now I've added Cayley-Menger. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to start way back at color plates. Okay, so if you watched the last video, I'm going to have a link to it. Where we went directly to is plate number 31. And I was talking about how as you move the planes of the tetrahedron together, you end up with an where did I put it? You end up with a cuboctahedron. And this is an approximation. By the way, it's nighttime here, so you can really see that United Nations flag pretty well now, right? Or is it this way? Sorry. Now you can see it really good. So, I was saying how once you're in the four intersecting hexagons, every move you make is one integer, and you can come around to the other side. In other words, in integer hops, you can get around. And you might be thinking, well, that's not really that different from a cube. Like if you're sort of starting at the middle of this cube, what can you do? You can go straight up to the face. Like, what are the integral moves, right? They're not just every diagonal. It's not on the integral scale, right? It's like you have fewer, say, degrees of freedom with the cube. A lot of it because it's a lot more redundant. There's a lot more parallel going on, these opposite sides. It's a hexahedron, and this is only a tetrahedron. But when you bring these plates together, the opposite planes smack up against each other, and you get the 8 octants of XYZ. You guys probably know XYZ pretty well, and I'm all for XYZ. Everything I do sits on top of XYZ, because all the machines and ray tracers I talk to, they're all XYZ. But as a conceptual thing, as kind of an API that I can sit on top of it, I can think in synergetics more natively, perhaps, if I use quadrate coordinates, for example. And I can jump in and out, right? We've had many coordinate systems over time. Now, just to be clear, the voxel, the space-filling voxel that's implied by the CCP, or the closest packed sphere matrix, whatever you want to call it, the FCC, some people say, it's not that this is the space-filling cell. It's that through all the face centers of the rhombic dodecahedron, through the face centers from your position at the center of this apparatus, you see these diamond faces in 12 directions. And it's through the centers of each one of those that you get to the neighboring rhombic dodecahedron. And these have volume 6 in our way of accounting. Just as these cubes are not unit volume, these are the volume 3 cubes, inside of which our unit volume tetrahedron is inscribed, okay? So that's all like latter-day transcendentalism, maybe, if we think of Bucky Fuller as a latter-day transcendentalist. But should we and can we and shall we? And is he kind of a globalist? But aren't transcendentalists also kind of nationalist? And today I'm looking at, for example, how they viewed the revolutions of 1848 and forward. In other words, in Europe, there was a lot of ferments. This is after, of course, the American Revolution of 1776 and so on. And so we have a pre-Civil War U.S. looking back at Europe, these so old countries, so-called, and a lot of revolution and ferment is going on in Europe. And Americans are kind of torn. Do they want to get involved? Do they want to take a side? By the way, the Buckminster Fuller Institute was online today. It says, it was live at one point. I watched some of this during Little Haiti in Miami, wherever exactly that is. I'm not super up on my Miami lore, but it was a good musical interlude in my day. So, and Palau comes up because, hey, I used to study Palau. I used to write about the issue of Palau and it's how it faced a difficult decision tree at a certain point, and how the genders how the women were the ones who held out longest as far as deciding to allow Palau to become militarized, like a military base, right, for war games and stuff. That's what's going on there at the moment. So, we are moving along to Margaret Fuller back in 1840s in Rome itself, right? So I'm reading this because I'm a member of Multnomah County Library, have a library card. I was able to actually download her diary from her time in Italy, right? It's just a sketch of what she probably had written in great detail in another book, but she went down with all hands, the ship bringing her back to America in about 1850, hit a reef, and it's a sad story. Like Emerson and Thoreau, I believe, were kind of waiting for her, actually at the dock on the shore, waiting for her ship to come in, and they saw it go down. And they recovered some of her stuff, including this diary, right? So that was a sad event. And we're talking about the great aunt of our Buckminster Fuller, who we talk about quite a bit. The Roman Republic didn't last long. It was kind of a rebellion against the papacy, and it was a wish for secular government. This is all Western history, the rise of secularism, not letting religion be the ruling temporal power. Not every civilization has gone through a phase like that. The U.S. certainly kind of did, although there's a lot of stress on the Christianity of America and in God we trust and all this. So much history. And this paper I was reading today is all about, it's kind of a summary of people's views about recent scholarship discussing how much were Americans' views about, say, the Civil War, which is looming in the near future. They didn't know that for sure, of course. But they're watching all this action in Europe, revolutions attempting and failing, and they're kind of making up their minds, conservative versus whatever. Like Margaret Fuller, she's very pro the revolution in Rome. She's on their side. She's actually married a soldier who is fighting on that side. So her husband and baby are among those who go down in the shipwreck. So then the question comes up, here's some author, I ran it by the Transcendentalists on Facebook, asking, do we have in Transcendentalism a basis for rekindling a national identity, a sense of identity? Can we look back to the Transcendentalists to help us reorient and come up with a narrative? And I'm somewhat sympathetic to that idea, especially if you do as I do and hook on the Bucky Fuller stuff as latter-day Transcendentalism, something this article does not consider. So I ran that by the Transcendentalists. Can you be a globalist and a nationalist, and what would that look like? And where are we with Transcendentalism versus like manifest destiny ideas and so on? I think it's typical today to think that because Transcendentalism was anti-slavery and to a large degree anti-imperialist. Look at Thoreau. Why did he go to jail that night? What was he protesting with his not paying his taxes and so on? So there's an awareness of world affairs in early Transcendentalism, right? And what is that? And is it a globalism? Can we call it a globalism? Can you be globalist, nationalist, and anti-imperialist all at the same time? I raise these questions, partly because, as you know, I'm connecting the dots for people who want to go forward with the Bucky stuff as already contextualized, well contextualized against a backdrop of history you already know, already get in school. Just like you're always already going to have a lot of mathematics around the tetrahedron already, and how do we just sort of dovetail in the Bucky Fuller contribution, and how do we not have any problem with Alexander Graham Bell coming in with the same idea? And in general, I would say the 1900s represent a kind of a turn away, we can see now in retrospect, from a very 90-degree rigidity, an orthodoxy centered around cubes, you could say, to a more tetrahedrally based way of conceptualizing. And you can see this clearly in organic chemistry or chemistry in general. And that's why I think if you tell people that Linus Pauling helped rediscover or helped discover the geometry of nature, that's going to sound okay to people's ears. Whereas if you say Bucky Fuller discovered that, that resonates with what sounds too boastful from his corner. It's like we don't let Bucky have enough credibility to begin with to tell us what happened in the 1900s in big picture terms. It's like, who are you to tell us? But other people are okay with learning his viewpoint, as clearly I am, right? And I think the way we're dovetailing it right now in current videos, but also online and discussions and so on, part of it is just consolidation, consolidating our heritage, looking at all the different tetrahedron formulas that derive purely from edge lengths. Nothing about the locations of the vertices in coordinates, nothing about angles, just tell me the 6 lengths. And again, the order is going to matter some, and what we've done here in this particular Jupyter notebook, which is online here and being shared, is to fine-tune all these formulae so they can, if we want them to, agree on what the volumes are of these different shapes. For example, the blue A module here, we're used to thinking of that as 1 over 24, and you slide up a little bit, keep the same altitude, and you get another one on top of it. We call that the B module, also 1 over 24. And imagine kind of a Minecrafty-like program where kids develop this spatial fluency that they really do feel that the rhombic dodecahedron is a space filler that they're really familiar with because they really learned the relationship with the ball packing. They've got all those associations going. They're very fluent in that way. I think that's what we're trying to accomplish, is kind of to create a right brain visual fluency that hasn't really been there. And that's why this material has importance regardless of what we eventually decide in terms of, does it mean anything at all in terms of nuclear physics or all the main practical applications we imagine might be there. They might be there, but before we get to that part, let's just admit that it's easier to construct a mental model of this polyhedron world if A, they're interrelated, like nested, one in the other, and B, you allow them to take on more whole number volumes than you were allowing, and C, give the tetrahedron its due as topologically minimal for volume, for an enclosure, for having an inside and an outside. As a cage, you kind of get started with the tetrahedron, and that's the PR, that's the propaganda. You've heard it before. It's how the Bucky people kind of brainwash each other. They talk this way. But I'm saying it's not devoid of merit to have a subculture carry this torch forward. I'm glad that some of us are doing it. And you can see from my videos how we're planning to like fit in. I won't say blend into the woodwork or become part of the wallpaper, but on the other hand, we don't have to stand out as uber discordant, like always bringing attention to ourselves. Something that Bucky learned early on is people will hear your ideas more if they're not fixated on what you're wearing or something like that. So he became more like a banker in his dress with the bow tie, the three-piece suit, all that. That was just sort of how you blend in as a suit, and it got people less thinking he was some kind of radical, just listen to what he had to say. That's what he found out. But today we have a different aesthetic. Like here in Oregon, you stand out if you dress up. Really, if you just want to blend in, you more like kind of have what we call a grunge dress code, but it's not as grungy as it used to be. Like we're not living in the time of Nirvana and well, I'm thinking in terms of music history, but I probably shouldn't because that's not my greatest area of competence. But you know what I mean. Watching this movie about cyberpunk history here, this documentary, it's like this is only part 3 and it's over 2 hours long. So my goodness, this is quite an undertaking. What I love about YouTube, in fact, is all these undertakings that, when I went to Princeton and had access to the best libraries in the world, I did not have access to YouTube. Like, we've really come a long way in terms of what we're able to provide people, but do we provide them time ever to really learn what's going on in their world? And, we give kids kind of a break if we can as kids, but pretty soon get in the workforce and whatever. When do you get to sit back and really consider and reflect? And shouldn't we, I hate to say it, be paying people to do that? Because isn't it really a priority that they be doing that? Really? Can't we think in terms of how we need an educated populace in order to live well, right? In fact, getting educated and living well are one and the same, right? So Transcendentalism always gets tied up in a kind of a utopianism. And I know that the University of Austin people and like Jordan Peterson and all that, when you say utopianism, you're already, talking about totalitarianism or fascism of some kind, right? But I think if you look at the book Quakernomics and you look back at the history of the Transcendentalists and what they attempted in terms of utopian communities, there was something enduring and something connecting to democracy and liberalism in those experiments, right? There's an egalitarianism that's not the same as, communism, right? Egalitarianism is an old virtue here in the West, you could say. It's a French thing as well. It's a Quaker thing. It's a British thing. It's where people don't automatically feel entitled based on nothing more than their station at birth or something like that. More of a meritocracy, but on the other hand, we're not even interested in vast disparities in wealth, because it's like when you're on a cruise ship, if you all do some of the work, you can all kind of be both staff and passenger. That would be kind of my floating university ideal, right? You're always doing the quote dirty jobs. Like at Princeton, I did plenty of dishwashing and janitorial stuff. and it was good. I learned a lot about, what those kinds of jobs require. And there's nothing. I worked in a janitorial capacity in the pub as well, the drinking center. What do we call that? The student center there at Princeton. All right, I have rambled on enough. Thanks for your attention. Good luck.